The war between Ukraine and Russia is never going to end too soon, and the Ukrainians seem to be relieved by the help the US is offering them this time around. As one of the most powerful countries in the world, the US has scared Russia with the F-14 Tomcat. Why is the F-14 Tomcat an extraordinary plane? We'll tell you everything about the F-14 Tomcat in this video. But before we start, please like and subscribe to this channel, and then sit back and relax. Now, let's start. F-14 Tomcat, a fighter built to hunt bombers. The US aircraft carrier fleet has long been the nation's best means of force projection, but its sheer size made its defense challenging. World War II demonstrated that aircraft were a greater threat at sea than enemy ships, and Vietnam showed the F-4 Phantom's shortcomings in dogfights. The Navy also knew that if the Cold War turned hot, a brutal war of attrition would be waged in the skies. The Navy needed an aircraft that could serve as the first line of defense for a carrier strike group, closing on approaching bombers at high speed and engaging them from distances long enough to keep their carriers out of harm's way. Initially, it was hoped that the TFX aircraft program would be able to provide both the Navy and the Air Force with the aircraft they needed. But thanks to Navy Admiral Thomas Tomcat Connolly's testimony before Congress, the Navy was granted permission to carry out its plans for a carrier-based fighter. The Navy's Top Gun School was already hard at work training pilots with the knowledge and ability to take on the Soviet Air Force. But the branch needed an aircraft that could combine the short takeoff and landing capabilities needed for a fighter based on aircraft carriers with the high top speed, payload capacity, and maneuverability of an interceptor fighter. A heavy fighter design proposed by the Grumman Aerospace Corporation seemed to fit the bill. Like the TFX fighter it would replace, this new design would incorporate a variable geometry wing that would allow the aircraft to maximize lift during takeoff and minimize drag during high-speed flight. The concept was not new. These types of shifter wings had appeared on aircraft dating back to Nazi Germany's Messerschmitt P1101, although that aircraft never flew. The prototype was discovered by US troops when they seized a Nazi research laboratory in the Bavarian Alps in 1945. The discovery left a particular impression on Robert J. Woods, the commander of the intelligence team. Woods went on to be a co-founder and chief designer of Bell Aircraft Corps. Inside an F-14 is like sitting in a Cadillac. During takeoff and low-speed flight, the wings of the new Grumman F-14 would sweep forward at the tips, expanding their overall area and giving the fighter more lift. At supersonic speeds, however, those wings would fold back and reduce the surface area, making it a more efficient high-speed pursuit fighter and giving it higher top speed and better fuel economy than its fixed-wing counterparts. And when the Navy said high speed, they meant it. Its newly designed F-14 Tomcat, named after the biggest proponent of it, would go on to put modern heavyweights like the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter and F-22 Raptor to shame. The Navy liked its new fighter so much that it opted to skip the prototype phase, putting the fighter into production in 1969 and taking delivery of its first new F-14s in 1972. And production continued through 1991, with a total of 712 F-14s built. F-14 Tomcat is air superiority with no compromises. At just 63 feet in length with a 64-foot wingspan, the F-14 Tomcat could reach speeds above Mach 1 at sea level and exceed Mach 2.34 at altitude, thanks to two General Electric F110GE afterburning turbofan engines of 400 that each produce over 28,000 pounds of thrust with their afterburners on. In total, the F-14 could cover 1,600 miles without refueling, but was generally considered to have a combat range of 1,000 miles. The F-14 was fast, no doubt about it. And while its sweeping wing system, which automatically adjusted for optimal performance at any speed or altitude, made this big heavy fighter surprisingly agile, the F-14 was much more than just fancy wings. New technology buried deep within the fighter's striking exterior made the F-14 a truly formidable opponent. From the radar intercept officer's seat, located just aft of the pilot, up to 24 enemy aircraft could be tracked from up to 195 miles away with the AWG-9 X-band pulse Doppler radar, which happened to use one of the first microprocessors to be installed in a combat aircraft. The powerful onboard systems could even direct long-range missiles at 6 different targets simultaneously without losing sight of the others. The trio of the Tomcat, the AWG-9 radar, and the Phoenix was designed to defend the fleet from Soviet supersonic bombers, whose primary mission was to destroy the aircraft carrier. The F-14 could potentially target and engage airborne cruise missiles thanks to the AWG-9 system's advanced capabilities. The ALR-23, the only internal infrared search and track sensor in the Western world at the time, provided early support for this system. However, it was subsequently replaced with an optical sensor that provided data directly to the AWG-9. The fighter's armament was equally robust, with a variety of options to choose from depending on the type of target and its distance from the Tomcat. With a total of 10 hardpoints and a weapons load capacity of 14,500 pounds, the Tomcat had a great payload, but the real heavy weapon was the Phoenix missile. Looking at it, the Tomcat was a huge plane with a huge radar purpose-built to fire the deadliest air-to-air missile in the Western inventory, the AIM-54 Phoenix. The path of the Cold War. The US Navy came to a decision point in 1991 after the fall of the Soviet Union. The formidable F-14 transformed into a warrior without battle, without the threat of Russian bombers hanging over its head. A total of 65 F-14s received tactical air reconnaissance systems, TARPS upgrades, transforming them into highly effective reconnaissance aircraft. Other F-14s received upgrades to make them better air-to-ground attack platforms. However, compared to certain more recent fourth-generation rivals such as the F/A-18 Hornet and its successor the Super Hornet, the F-14 was more expensive to maintain and more challenging to fly. When the Gulf War began, the already outdated F-14 systems could not distinguish between friendly and enemy aircraft at long range, and thanks to the aircraft's reputation as a dogfight champion, Iraqi fighters avoided engaging each other to them. The Tomcat was relegated to fruitless patrols. Worse, the Navy lost a Tomcat to an Iraqi SA-2 surface-to-air missile. Thanks to some electronic improvements, Tomcats flew airstrike missions against ground targets in the early days of modern warfare in both Iraq and Afghanistan, but the glory days of the Tomcat were long gone. The less expensive Super Hornets were purpose-built for air-to-ground combat, and as the millennium ushered in the new, the Navy began to see maintaining a fleet of air superiority fighters on its carriers as less important and too expensive. In 2006, the F-14 was retired in favor of the slower and cheaper Super Hornet. From the top to the bottom. In 1986, 20 years before Tomcat's retirement, Top Gun dominated the box office, but the film's success did much more than fill American theaters. Navy recruiting skyrocketed as recruiters set up tables just outside the screenings to answer questions from aspiring airmen. Tom Cruise may have been the star, but for young Americans who dream of flying a fighter jet, it was the Tomcat that stole the show. Now, the US Navy has shoved most of its F-14s into huge industrial shredders, a tragic end for such an iconic aircraft. Before the Iranian Revolution in the late 1970s, the United States sold 79 Tomcats to Iran. Currently, fewer than 12 are believed to be operational, and the remaining pieces are feared to find their way into Iranian hands. But the legacy of the plane lives on, and not just in Top Gun Maverick. The systems that went live on the Tomcat continued to mature and are now found on numerous combat platforms. And with China on the rise, it seems likely that elements of the Tomcat will find life again in the form of America's next air superiority fighter. The F-14 was a fighter purpose-built for a war that never was. But when deterrence is the name of the game, the Tomcat accomplished its mission. After all, it's hard to beat a fully loaded F-14, roaring at twice the speed of sound, and loaded with over 14,000 pounds of missiles. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit like, the subscription button, and the notification bell. To get notified when new videos are uploaded from this channel, please share your thoughts about why is Russia most scared of America's new F-14 Tomcat in the comments section below. Thank you.